No,
Something
she has
wrong?
not started yet. She has not started.
भावातीत ध्यान कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। भावातीत ध्यान कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। अनुभव कर लो, अनुभव कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। 20 मिनट बस ध्यान कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। सुबह शाम बस ध्यान कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। आसन प्राणायाम कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। अनुभव कर लो, अनुभव कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। भावातीत ध्यान कर लो। सबकी आत्मा शांति का सागर है, सबकी आत्मा आनंद का सागर है। सबकी आत्मा शांति का सागर है। सबकी आत्मा ज्ञान का सागर है। सबकी आत्मा ज्ञान का सागर है। सबकी आत्मा शक्ति का सागर है। सागर है, सागर है। अनुभव कर लो, अनुभव कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। 20 मिनट बस ध्यान कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। सुबह शाम बस ध्यान कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। आसन प्राणायाम कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। भावातीत ध्यान कर लो, जीवन पूर्ण बनेगा। अनुभव कर लो, अनुभव कर लो।
जय गुरुदेव माँ जी।
जय गुरुदेव। Swagatam to our Maharishi Gita Satsang on chapter 5, Karma Sanyasa Yoga. We will begin with Shanti Part. Pandit ji, कृपया सहना भवतु बोलना। Pandit ji, please unmute.
जय गुरुदेव दीदी।
जय गुरुदेव।
ओम सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधेतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति।
कृपया 5वां अध्याय का 13, 14, 15 और 16 का पारायण करना।
ठीक है जी दीदी। ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः। न कृत्यत्वं न कर्माणि लोकस्यासृजति प्रभुः। न कर्मफलसंयोगं स्वभावस्तु प्रवर्तते। न दत्ते कस्यचित् पापं न चैव सुकृतं विभुः। अज्ञानेनावृतं ज्ञानं तेन मुह्यन्ति जन्तवः। ज्ञानेन तु तज्ज्ञानं येषां नाशतीत्मनः तेषामादित्यवत् ज्ञानं प्रकाशयति तत्परम्। तद्बुद्ध्यास्तधात्मानस्तन्निष्ठास्तत्परायणाः गच्छन्त्या पुनरावृत्तिं ज्ञाननिर्धूतकल्मषाः।
Jai Gurudev. So we studied 13 to 16 verses of chapter 5 last week, and the recap of these 4 shlokas with English translation is like this. Having renounced all action by the mind, the dweller in the body rests in happiness in the city of 9 gates, neither acting nor causing action to be done. Sri Krishna Bhagavan creates neither the authorship of action nor the actions of beings, nor does he create the link between the doer, the action, and its fruits. Nature carries that. The all-pervading intelligence does not accept the sin or even the merit of anyone. Wisdom is veiled by ignorance. Thereby, creatures are deluded. But in those in whom that ignorance is destroyed by wisdom, wisdom, like the sun, illumines that which is transcendent. So these were the 4 shlokas we have discussed last time. And today we will begin with a discussion of verses 17 through 22. I will be, commenting for the first 3 shlokas, and then I will have to sign out, and then Mataji will carry on. So verse number 17 goes like this. Tadbuddhayastadaatmana tannishthah tatparayanaha gacchantya punaravrittim jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha. Tadbuddhayastadaatmana tannishthah tatparayanaha. gacchantya punaravrittim. Jnana nirdhuta kalmashaha. Their intellect rooted in that their being established in that, wholly devoted to that, cleansed of all impurities by wisdom, they attain to a state from which there is no return. Jai Gurudev. Reading, please.
Jai Gurudev, this verse unites yoga and Sankhya in their common goal of absolute purity and eternal liberation. It supports the truth of verses 4 and 5, which proclaim the theme of this chapter. The words intellect and being are of great significance, and so is the sequence in which they are used. It teaches that when the intellect is rooted in that, the whole of one's being also becomes established in that. Moreover, when during meditation the intellect becomes rooted in that, on coming out of the transcendent, it remains intent on that. When the intellect becomes intent on that, one's being becomes wholly devoted to that. The word being has been chosen here to translate the Sanskrit word Atma, which is variously used to mean the self, the intellect, the mind, the breath, and the body. Therefore, the expression being becomes wholly devoted to that means that the mind, the breath, and the body all become oriented towards that. Sri Krishna Bhagavan shows that unless the intellect and the whole of one's being are established in the transcendent reality, they are not pure. They remain in the realm of temporary existence, unconnected with the state of eternal freedom, whence there is no return unless the transcendent absolute phase of life is realized. The scope of the individual phase of life remains insignificant and its purpose is not fulfilled. Bondage continues and the cycle of birth and death meets no end. This verse makes it clear that purity of life, which is the basis of all success in the world, and at the same time, the basis of eternal freedom, is gained by wisdom, realization of the transcendent. It also states the principle that unless a man has established this absolute state of purity in his life, by rising to the state of cosmic consciousness, there may always be the possibility of his stepping down to a lower level of life. This means that as long as the transcendental consciousness has not become permanent, the effect of morning meditation does not persist in its full intensity throughout the day. As the hours go by, the intensity of the effect diminishes, and with this level of purity in life falls until the evening meditation restores it. Be without three gunas, as explained by Sri Krishna Bhagavan in 45th verse of the second chapter, is the key to realizing the teaching of this verse in daily life. Life finds its goal in the state of eternal freedom of the transcendent, spoken of here as that knowledge itself. The use of the word that makes it clear that the goal of life does not lie in the sphere of phenomenal existence. It lies beyond it. The real life is not this, which is commonly referred to as life. Beyond this is that reality of life. This is the teaching of life from the standard point of renunciation. The Upanishads declared, Tattvamasi, thou art, implying that this obvious phase of phenomenal existence, which you take as yourself, is not your real nature. You, in fact, are that transcendent reality, cleansed of all impurity by wisdom. Refer to verses 35-38 of chapter 4, from which there is no return. As long as the self is not embedded in the eternity of life, as long as the mind has not permanently gained absolute purity in transcendental consciousness, life remains within the relative field of existence. In this situation, the cycle of birth and death continues within the various strata of the evolution of life. When one has gained cosmic consciousness, life goes beyond the sphere of birth and death. For being eternal, it is changeless. It cannot partake of change. It should be clearly noted that this situation can only be created during man's life on earth. It is as a man that one rises to that state from which there is no return. The way to it lies in the principle described in 45th verse of chapter 2. The following verse also is concerned with transcending and the diversity of the form in creation, and it portrays the oneness of life everywhere. It continues the teaching of the renunciation of this to find that. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. The word Tat is used 4 times in this verse. So, let us first understand what Tat means. It's a very commonly used word in Upanishads. Tat in Sanskrita means transcendence. Transcendence means it is beyond the relative phenomenal existence. It is Nirgun Nirakar Brahman. It has no attributes. There is no name or form or qualities to that state of existence. It is also called as God in common language and also as Paramatma. So, this verse is teaching that when the intellect, buddhi, is rooted in Tat, the whole of one's being is also established in that. During our transcendental meditation program, our intellect gets rooted in Tat. And when it comes out, it remains intent on that. Then one's being becomes wholly devoted to that. Now, let us talk about Atma. In this verse, the word being with a small s, with a small b, is chosen for Atma. So, as we all know, some Sanskrit words as well as some English words, they have more than one meaning. Here, Atma is variously used to mean self with capital S. It is also used for intellect, mind, breath, and even the body. So, when it is said and body means transcendence. That why is it important that the whole being is devoted to that? Because only when you are pure, it can happen. Only when you are pure, you can be devoted and be established in Tat. That is that. Paramatma. There is a great practical significance to having this, and that is success of life depends on purity of one's life. Maharishi said many times, Kriya Siddhi Sattve Bhavati Mahatam Nopakarane, which means that the success of action depends on the purity in one's life, not on the means, not on the instruments. One may think that he has a lot of money, lot of resources, manpower, etc. So he may think that his business is going to be successful. But if he does not have purity, then one may not get any nature support and may not be successful in his actions. So, in order to make this purity of transcendental meditation, in order to make this purity of transcendental consciousness permanent, it is essential to meditate twice daily, because the effect of morning fades away by evening, and then when we do evening meditation, the effect of meditation, we regain the benefit of the evening meditation. So our favorite slogan is TM, AM, PM. We follow that religiously if we want to rise in higher states of consciousness more quickly. Upanishads declare Tattvamasi. The English translation is thou art, that thou art. That is, you are that. This is one of the 4 Mahavakyas, great Vakyas, sentences in the Vedic literature. Tattvamasi means you are that transcendent reality. That's what the Vedas are telling us, that your essential nature is that transcendent reality. That's what we are. Here, the limited individual life rises to the unlimited cosmic existence. This is a very important statement, so I repeat it. The limited individual life rises to the unlimited cosmic existence. Again, in even more simple words, it means my consciousness is same as consciousness of Brahman. Aham means I. My that of Paramatma, of God. So, God is one indivisible consciousness, without qualities and without any form. And God is Anant, that means one consciousness. Dvaita means two. But Advaita means not two. That consciousness is one and it is indivisible. It is that same consciousness that I have, that is Paramatma's consciousness. So, by transcending, we have that experience of that my consciousness is same as that of God's consciousness. That's what the word Tattvamasi means. This shloka is also telling us that sthita prajna means one with a steady intellect, is cleansed of all impurities by wisdom. We studied that in the second chapter, that wisdom means transcendence. So, when you connect with transcendence in our meditation, all impurities are washed away. And once we reach cosmic consciousness, there is no rebirth. Means you are liberated from bondage. Because as we have studied in the past, the actions are binding. And the way to get out of this bondage is to transcend. So even after we reach this state of cosmic consciousness, where we are liberated from bondage of action, we continue to evolve and reach God consciousness, which is a state of perfect enlightenment and fulfillment. So I will stop now and request Anitaji to give us a brief scientific research on this study. Go ahead.
Yes, Hemaji. Since we in this verse we have understood a very important point, that is the intellect is rooted in that. So with this now, there was a greater ability to focus intently, and consequently, there is greater intellectual orientation, increased intelligence. There is experiences towards higher states of consciousness correlated with neurological integration. That is, the capacity for absorbing experiences because we are focused of attention. So this verse is especially very important because our main mind goes on the intent, the intellect is rooted on that. So that is the main thing, as Hemaji has explained. So when we are focused completely on that, there is a marked improvement in the development of intelligence and increased IQ. Thank you, Jai Gurudev.
Thank you, Anitaji. Any questions, please? Go ahead. Or you can give any appealing point or main point or whatever you would like to add. Please go ahead.
Jai Gurudev Hema, is somebody going to read the verses because I didn't get the book?
Yeah, somebody will
Somebody
read.
the verses for me? For me, you know.
Yeah, for you.
Somebody
Bindu,
will read the verses, right?
Bindu will read the
Verse.
English translation in verse, English translation of the Sanskrit word. She's going to read it. So
Yeah.
because I'm going to sign out, we may not have Sanskrit, a reading of the shloka, but Bindu will read the English translation. Is that right, Bindu?
Yes, Hemaji.
Yeah,
See,
or the Pandit is
18th
here,
one I
right?
should read, right? Hemaji,
Huh?
18th one you want me to read?
One of the
Right.
Pandit is here, right? He can read.
That's right. Panditji is here. So
he can read all the three verses together, and then and then she can read the English.
So
one after the other, she can read if she wants. Whichever way it is okay.
Yeah, I just noticed Panditji got cut off. So after I leave, Mataji and Bindu will manage. If Panditji is here, ask them to recite the Sanskrit shloka. But because of technical issues like Wi-Fi, I just noticed he disappeared. So if he comes back, please have them read Sanskrita and Bindu will read the English.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a little bit different today.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't get the book, so to read.
Okay. So we will continue with verse 18 now. Sunita, yeah, Sunita will display.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai
Vidya
Gurudev.
Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Sunichaiva Swapake cha Sunichaiva Swapake cha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. I will repeat again. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Sunichaiva Swapake cha Panditaha Samadarshinaha. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Sunichaiva Swapake cha Panditaha Samadarshinaha.
Yeah. You're reading the English?
Yes, sir, Mataji. In a Brahmin endowed with learning and humility, in a cow, in an elephant, in a dog, and even in one who has lost his caste, the enlightened perceive the same. This verse provides a criterion of vision in the state of enlightenment. Those who have realized the reality of life perceive the same oneness through all the diversity of experience. Brahmin, a man born in a Brahmin family whose life is dedicated to the study of the Veda and spiritual learning. The use of this word in conjunction with cow, elephant, and dog indicates that Sri Krishna Bhagavan wants to emphasize that the being of an evolved man and that of the animals is the same, and that established in the oneness of being and having realized the unity of the transcendent underlying all diversity, he gains evenness of vision. Learning and humility, wisdom brings humility. Just as the wise man sees the distinctions and differences in creation as only temporary, with one ultimate reality underlying them all, so he does not insist that things should happen in any particular way. He takes things lightly, for he knows they all have their common end. This natural quality of being in the wise is interpreted as humility. Indeed, humility is the criterion of wisdom, arising as it does out of the increased sense of the oneness of life, of the basic unity of all beings. Humility is commonly understood to be the honest recognition of one's personal limitations, one's ignorance, and insignificance. But true humility lies in the quality of being and not in any attitude of mind. The mind of the realized man is fully infused with the state of being, the oneness of life, and such a mind naturally has oneness of vision irrespective of what it sees. The apparent distinctions of relative existence fail to create division in its view. This does not mean that such a man fails to see a cow or is unable to distinguish it from a dog. Certainly, he sees a cow as a cow and a dog as a dog, but the form of the cow and the form of dog fail to blind him to the oneness of the self, which is the same in both. Although he sees a cow and a dog, his self is established in the being of the cow and the being of the dog, which is his own being. Sri Krishna Bhagavan stresses that the enlightened man, while beholding and acting in the whole of diversified creation, does not fall from his steadfast unity of life with which his mind is saturated and which remains indelibly infused into his vision. A Brahmin endowed with learning and humility represents all that is dominated by the influence of sattva. A cow represents all that is dominated by the mixed influence of rajas and sattva. A dog represents all that is dominated by rajas and tamas. An elephant represents all that is dominated by the influence of tamas. One who has lost his caste represents the lowest in human life, a man living in complete ignorance, who has lost the path of his evolution. The meaning is that one who has realized the self as separate from the field of relative existence and steadfast in himself and quite untouched by the influence of sattva, rajas, or tamas and tendencies that arise from them. He has evenness of vision everywhere. The following verse shows the primary importance of such oneness of vision. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. So, this verse is telling us that self-realized souls perceive the same oneness, samadarshinaha, in everything they see. And the word here used is pandita. A pandita is a wise man. He states he perceives the same that he's here. The word brahmana means etc. is called as, so that kind of person is considered to be having more sattva in him. Like in conjunction with a cow, these qualities, the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, have been shown in these different animals. In conjunction with a cow, with an elephant, a dog, and one who lost his caste. Because being, that is consciousness of an evolved Brahman and animals is the same. So it's a consciousness that is the same, but the gunas are different. That is what we need to understand here. And a wise man, a pandita, he knows that. Even though on the surface he sees a cow or an elephant or a dog or whatever, he knows that their qualities, their gunas are different on the surface, but underlying that diverse gunas, the different gunas, he sees on the surface. But at the same time, he sees that there is unity. Unity means one consciousness. This one consciousness is same in all these animals which have different levels of sattva, rajas, or tamas. And why is this important for us to know? Because wisdom brings humility. So the Sanskrita word that is used for humility, and the phrase, there's a phrase, beautiful, vidya dadati vinayam. That means a wise man knows that differences are superficial, but the underlying reality is the same in all. Also, humility is commonly understood as being humble. In our common daily life, when we say somebody is having very humble, we say somebody so-and-so is humble. And that is on the superficial level. But true humility lies in the quality of being. It's not an attitude of mind. When somebody transcends, they are established in being, in Atma. And that's where true humility comes from. And another point that is covered in this shloka is, when we say the Pandita, the wise man, he sees that consciousness is same in everything, this doesn't mean that he fails to see the difference between a cow and a dog. Cow is a cow and dog is a dog. But he is always aware of the oneness of the self, of the oneness of the consciousness in a dog and a cow. It is the same consciousness. The consciousness in him, in a cow and a dog, is the same. This is what we understand from this very beautiful shloka. And the last point that is brought out here is that the Pandita, the wise man, is untouched by the influence of sattva, rajas, and tamas. And the examples that are given in the animals, then he understands that the superficial qualities are only superficial. And then because he has this wisdom, this Sthita Prajna maintains evenness of vision everywhere. And that comes spontaneously. It's not on the thinking level. It's on the experiential level. And this experience comes spontaneously when we transcend. It's a very beautiful shloka. And I'll stop now and request Anita to please give the scientific research.
Yes, Himaji. In the verse 18, as we understand that consciousness is the same, but gunas are different. So when we understand this, then we have an increased tolerance, increased trust, and a greater empathy, increased sensitivity to the feeling of others, and we know exactly how to handle, forgive, agree with the nature of others and everyone. We also here realize the increased respectfulness and the growth of a more sympathetic, helpful, and caring nature. So this verse specially gives us a great importance of tolerance as we see. Thank you, Jai Gurudev.
Very nice scientific study. How we develop tolerance to other people when we know the superficial level as well as the underlying level. Otherwise, some people may put down, some other people thinking they're bad and all that. So this is of very great practical value. Very nice shloka and very nice scientific research. So we will take questions now. Please go ahead. Any questions? You can ask now. Okay. So we move on to the next shloka. I see Panditji is back. So after I leave, you can have Panditji read the Sanskrit shlokas. So we move on to verse 19 now. Bindu, do you want to do it or do you want me to do it? How shall we do?
I'll read Himaji.
Okay, go ahead.
Sanskrit also?
Yeah.
Okay. Jai Gurudev. Ihaiva taijita sarko esham samye sthitam manaha nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmani te sthitaha. ihaiva tairjita sargo esham samye sthitam manaha nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmat brahmani te sthitaha. Even here, in this life, the universe is conquered by those whose mind is established in equanimity, flawless, indeed, and equally present everywhere is Brahman. Therefore, they are established in Brahman. Chekute. When the mind, through the practice of transcendental meditation, rises to the state of cosmic consciousness, absolute being becomes permanently established in the nature of the mind, and it attains the state of Brahman, the universal being. Then the mind finds itself on a level of life from which all the gross and subtle levels of creation can be stimulated, controlled, and commanded. It is like a gardener who knows how to work at the level of the sap and can influence the whole tree in any way he likes. Someone who is
हाँ अच्छा से
acquainted
डालो उसमें गर्म पानी मेरे को भी
with
दे
the
दो
atomic or subatomic level of an object by working on that level could easily bring about a desired change in any stratum of the object's existence. This is what Sri Krishna Bhagwan means when he says, even here in this life, the universe is conquered by those whose mind is established in equanimity, in the serenity, the calmness, which is the ultimate level of life. This verse reveals the status of the established intellect, described here as the state in which the universe is conquered. Contentment, power, wisdom, and the ability to support all things are obvious qualities of a conqueror of the world. These qualities and many more besides are found in the nature of a man who, while living in the world, has gained equanimity of mind. That stable state of evenness of mind in the eternal oneness of reality belongs to the field of pure consciousness or omnipresent being, which is the very source of life energy, the reservoir of eternal wisdom, the origin of all power in nature, and the fountainhead of all success in the world. As long as the mind has not risen permanently to the state of being and cognized the field of activity as separate from itself, so long does it continue to be involved with activity. Indeed, it is like a slave to activity, a slave to the universe. But when it gains stability in being and acquires a natural state of equanimity, then it finds the universe as separate from itself, responding quite automatically like a servant to its every need. This state of separateness of being from activity, which is the basis of equanimity of mind, is gained through both yoga and Sankhya. Jai Gurudev.
So, this verse is telling us about established intellect, sthita prajna. It says, the universe is conquered by people who are established in their intellect, one who is sthita prajna. In enlightenment, mind is more and more relaxed. Such Jivan Muktas are established in equanimity, in serenity, in calmness. This is the ultimate level of life, and it is an acid test of enlightenment. And they are flawless. Nirdosha is the word used in this situation. And it says the universe is conquered by such people. And there are other qualities of Sthita Prajna that we have studied in chapter 2. And those who have conquered the universe, they are content. And they have power, they have wisdom. And they have the ability to support all things. Plus, they have equanimity. And all this we have studied in chapter 2. So it's nice review of the qualities of Sthita Prajna. Those qualities of serenity, balance, etc., they belong to pure consciousness, which is source of life. It is source of energy and power. And it is an inexhaustible reservoir of energy, intelligence, and happiness. It is called as Sat Chit Ananda in Sanskrita. And this is the fountainhead of all success in life. So I'll stop here and we'll have scientific research and then take questions. Go ahead, please.
Hemaji, in this verse 19, where we read whose mind is established in equanimity, this was verified by scientific research in decreased anxiety through Maharishi Transcendental Meditation, decreased tension, decreased nervousness, decreased neuroticism, and decreased hidden mental turbulence, which is obvious because now the mind is established in equanimity. Thank you, Jai Gurudev.
Okay. But we are all settled now.
That's okay.
Now, you know, now there is I don't think you need anything more now.
So, Anita-ji summarized everything so beautifully in a couple of sentences. So now we have so many scientific charts that we almost know what's going to come up. So that's okay. So any questions? Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Okay. So we move on.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to, sign out, but we'll meet next week and see you all then. Jai Gurudev. Mataji, please carry on.
Yeah. Hima, you carry on, Nana.
Yes, Mataji.
You're reading both
I read?
anyway. Yeah.
I will read sloka and...
Hima,
Yes,
for reading the commentary, please give chance to Sunita if she likes to read. Okay?
Yes, Sanitaji.
Please ask her because you are continuously going. We were to alternate and Sunita must be waiting, right?
No problem.
Yeah, Sunita, you can read this verse and next I'll read and then give it to Emma, right?
Okay, fine.
Okay, chaliye.
So shall I read 20th verse Sanskrit?
Yeah,
Yes.
you read the Sanskrit and you can read the verse also.
Okay.
And then the commentary, Sunita can read.
Yes. Thank you, Anita ji. Jai Gurudev. न प्रहृष्येत् प्रियं प्राप्य नो द्विजेत् प्राप्य च प्रियं स्थिरबुद्धिरसम्मूढो ब्रह्मविद् ब्रह्मणि स्थितः न प्रहृष्येत् प्रियं प्राप्य नो द्विजेत् प्राप्य च प्रियं स्थिरबुद्धिरसम्मूढो ब्रह्मविद् ब्रह्मणि स्थितः. He who neither greatly rejoices on obtaining what is dear to him, nor grieves much on obtaining what is unpleasant, whose intellect is steady, who is free from delusion, he is a knower of Brahman, established in Brahman. Jai Gurudev. Sunita?
Yes. Jai Gurudev. This verse describes the nature of the enlightened man's mind. He stands for full reality, the relative and the absolute together. 1 second. Such a man has his own likes and dislikes. He has his own joys and sorrows. They do not take him out of himself. This meaning is clear from the words greatly qualifying grieves. It shows that a realized man, even though established in divine consciousness, keeps his feet on the ground. Remaining on the human level, he is divine. When the mind is deeply rooted in the bliss consciousness of the self, it naturally remains unaffected by the attachment or aversion present in the objects of the senses. This is the reason why the enlightened man neither rejoices nor grieves. It is a common experience, even in worldly life, that when the mind is deeply rooted in one thing, it fails to register deeply experiences of other matters. If the idea of catching an aeroplane on time engages the mind fully, none of driving through the streets will deflect the mind from the air terminal. The experience of the other things remains on the surface level of sensory perception and makes only a very faint impression on the mind. If this is the waking state of consciousness, how much more so when it's
Breaking up, Nana.
but
It's breaking up.
fails to register deep.
No, you're audible, but it's breaking up. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe internet issues.
Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Because all these three verses are very big commentaries.
Okay, this
Go
verse
ahead.
I will read and the next ma'am will read it. It will be fine.
Yeah.
But fails to register deeply the experience of that world. His intellect is steady in its own inner light, the light of self. He is awake in himself and yet is awake in the outer world. He lives the divine in the absolute and the relative together. Therefore, he is a knower of Brahman, established in Brahman. Consider a man in the waking state of consciousness, engaged in the experience of the outside world, while at the same time he carries the experience of the dreaming state of consciousness in his mind. For the experiences of the waking state are certainly more concrete than those of coexist. This makes it clear it is possible for a man to be in yet accept the experience of another state of consciousness. At the same time, its self-sufficiency is so overwhelming that even in the waking state of consciousness, one maintains in oneself the influence of being. Moreover, when the maintenance of being in the permanent, the entire activity of the waking state is found only on the very surface of the mind. This is a state of cosmic consciousness in which activity is separate from being. It will be noticed that Sri Krishna Bhagavan describes two conditions that have to be fulfilled if a man is to become realized. The first is that he should be a knower of Brahman, that is, he should have a intellectual understanding of reality. This condition belongs to the second condition is that he should be established in Brahman, that is, he should divine nature so that his daily life becomes its expression. This concludes the teaching of verses 4 and 5 of the present chapter, and also that the last verse of chapter 4. In that, it satisfies both Sankhya and Yoga on the level of renunciation. It describes the state of renunciation of a realized man, whether he has realized through yoga or delusion about his own identity. This makes the intellect steady. This steadiness of intellect is the state of life in which he neither greatly rejoices on obtaining what is dear to him, nor grieves much on obtaining what is unpleasant. The present verse brings a life of a realized man who does not rejoice in any reason for his renunciation. He is fixed in the bliss of his own being. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. So, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan Krishna always brings back this knowledge for everyone that you must realize that you are that self, that you are that infinite, all-pervading self. You are not limited. You are unbounded. You do not have boundaries. And because you are unlimited and unbounded, when you are so vast and so infinite, then there is nothing that you can get bound to. The bondage is only a limited thing. So you don't get bound to the limited things, and you couldn't create attachments to the limited things when you yourself are so vast and so infinite. So all self-realization, and then from that vantage, stabilizing that outside you and around you, so that you understand related to everything else. Now here, it ends with, brings to light the natural state of renunciation in the life of a realized man who does not rejoice in anything external. So one thing very important here is the natural state of renunciation that has come on. The natural state of renunciation has come on because he is rejoicing within himself. He is rejoicing, that means he is blissful within himself. And so he rejoices anything external. When he is rejoicing within himself and is not rejoicing anything external, that means he doesn't find anything else, much more attractive than the inner bliss itself. So naturally, this renunciation comes. The renunciation, the detachment comes. And this, the dispassion comes. Yes, everything else is that forever changing. Everything else is limited. And it is in boundaries. It is not, and there is raga dvesha that comes here. So I think this is very important to understand. And the second emphasizing is the nature of the enlightened man's mind. The second is active in the manifested world. He's active. He's, doing whatever. Suppose I take care of everything. If you're a teacher, you're teaching the students, all those things. But all these things do not register deeply. All these experiences in the world, they do not register deeply. His intellect is steady in its own inner light, which is the light of the self. So here, the most important thing is you're awake as an enlightened being, you're awake within yourself, and you're also awake to the world around you. So he lives the absolute and the relative together. And this is the life of the divine. This is the life of the divine, where you live the absolute and the relative together. And this living the relative and the absolute together is the knower of Brahman, or established in Brahman. Now, next, let's look at the next point here, where it describes the nature of the enlightened man's mind. So, such a man, he has his own likes and dislikes. Even this enlightened man has his own likes and dislikes. Even our Bhagavan, we say, this Bhagavan likes this prasadam, he likes this alankarana, and he likes this, the seat, asanam, and, all these things are there. We find even with our manifest devas, we always say, when the festivals come, this is the way, Bhagavan wants to be worshipped, he wants to be dressed, he wants to be eating the prasadam and all those things. So here also, the enlightened person also has his likes and dislikes. He has his own joys and sorrows in the relative field because he's living in that life. And so something that is joyful, that is happening around him, also creates some joy. And something that is happening on the sorrow level also touches him. It may not be settled so deeply inside and create a very deep impression, but it certainly touches him, can bring tears into his eyes, and can bring such sorrow and compassion in the heart. This, they do not take him out of himself. And so the realized man, though established in divine consciousness, he keeps his feet on the ground and remaining on that humane level, he is divine. So this is very important to understand here. Now, when the mind is deeply rooted in the bliss consciousness, it naturally remains unaffected by the attachment or aversion present in the object of the senses. So they touch and they go, they can touch, but they will not create a deep impression. And this is why the enlightened man neither rejoices nor grieves. It is a common experience, even in worldly life, that when the mind is deeply rooted in one thing, it fails to register deeper experiences. So now the next thing is, what we are trying to say is that even, a man in the waking state of consciousness, although he is engaged in the experience of the outside world, the experiences of the waking state are certainly more concrete than those of the dreaming state. So what has been said is that even if you are in one state of consciousness, whether you are in, waking state or dreaming state, yet the experience of the other state is accepted, but you do not become that. You can remain as the self. So I think this is the crux of this whole verse, that either through the Sankhya or through the yoga, you can attain the inner state of renunciation of the realized man, and it does not matter. And because he has realized the independent nature of the self, such a man is without delusion about his own identity. This makes the intellect steady. And again and again, it is said the steadiness of the intellect is the state of life in which he neither greatly rejoices on obtaining what is dear to him, nor grieves much on obtaining what is unpleasant. So he has moved beyond the ragadveshas. Is this clearly understood? Is this
Yes,
clearly
Mataji.
understood? Yeah.
So we have the scientific research on this,
Yeah.
which shows that once you reach that state which you are described now, a man with natural stability and
Yeah.
the qualities of blissfulness in its own inner self, then he remains renunciated because he has the steady intellect not to grieve or to rejoice, though he does, but that he knows exactly that does not create any impressions on him.
Yeah.
Because by Maharishi, this verse, by the scientific research, it has been proven that there has been a growth of self actualization now. There has been increased self sufficiency. And when this thing takes place, then there is more acceptance of the self, nature, and others, the loss of fear of death, the development of openness, receptivity, and a caring attitude and cheerfulness, positive thinking, spontaneity, and freshness of appreciation. So the qualities of self satisfaction, less sensitivity to criticism, improved concentration, and mental clarity are developed. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. I think the most important thing here, Anita, is that, we learn, we develop tolerance to everything that is going around, and we have more accepting, whatever is being presented to life. Because this is the ever-changing phenomena. From morning till evening, just imagine how many things are bombarding you. And, so we develop that natural accepting things the way they are, and then the natural tolerance. And I think this is the greatest growth. So it doesn't mean that, again, that there are no likes or dislikes. It doesn't mean that one is not touched by the sorrows or the joys, but
Yes,
don't
Mataji.
create, they don't
Mataji.
create deep impressions. Yeah.
Yeah, Mataji, but the most important, then you have reached that level of self actualization. Then
Yes.
only you are able to tolerate and accept and have that flexibility and, that qualities that are imbibed in you and are appreciate at the manifest level also.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So it is just, the growth, the total growth of from the relative to the absolute, the
Yes.
infusion that a pure absolute consciousness into the relative. And what does this is, again, your repeated experience of the transcendent, repeated experience of the samadhi is, more and more of this, absolute is going into the relative. And one day you realize that you are the fully shining sun or the fully bloomed lotus, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can continue, Mataji, if
Continue.
you give permission. Can we continue to the next verse?
Yes, continue, please.
Hema, next verse 21.
Yes,
Hema, you read the Sanskrit verse and also the commentary, and I will do the last one.
yes, sir, Anitaji. Thank you, Anitaji. Jai Gurudev. बाह्यस्पर्शेष्वसक्तात्मा विन्दत्यात्मनि युत्सुकम् सब्रह्मयोगयुक्तात्मा सुखमक्षयमश्नुते बाह्यस्पर्शेष्वसक्तात्मा विन्दत्यात्मनि युत्सुकम् Sabrahma Yoga Yuktatma Sukhamakshaya. He whose self is untouched by external contacts knows that happiness, which is in the self, his self joined in union with Brahman, he enjoys eternal happiness. Self is untouched by external contacts in order to gain the experience of the inner self in the transcendental state of consciousness. The experience of outside objects has to be eliminated. Through constant experience, the self becomes so familiar to the mind that the very nature of the mind is transformed into the nature of the self. Then, transcendental consciousness is maintained together with the waking state of consciousness, which continues to support all activity as it did before. By virtue of the permanent maintenance of transcendental consciousness, the self is always experienced as self, and simultaneously, by virtue of the waking state of consciousness, activity continues to be experienced. This is how the self is experienced as separate from activity. In this state, the self is lost forever. It has become the self. With the loss of self, the contact of the self with objects through the agency of the mind and senses, which was responsible for giving rise to experience, becomes non-existent. What remains is the self in its pure nature of bliss consciousness, devoid of any contact with objects that were held by the self. This is what Sri Krishna Bhagavan means when he says, he whose self is untouched by external contacts, now that the self is forever established in its own essential nature, bliss consciousness has become permanent. When this bliss consciousness comes in contact with objects, it produces a state described by the expression self joined in union with Brahman. This is because Brahman is the state of cosmic consciousness which embraces activity and bliss consciousness. Joined in union with Brahman, this expression together with self is untouched by external contacts, presents a criterion whereby a seeker can know when he gained Brahmasthiti or the state of Brahman, cosmic consciousness, while the mind is experiencing objects through the senses. He is awake in the awareness of his self as separate from the field of experience and action. This then is the state of cosmic consciousness in which he is awake in the world and awake in himself. Many commentators have done great injustice to the teaching of this verse by suggesting that it describes a technique of enjoying the bliss of the self by means of constructing a mood of remaining unaffected while experiencing joy through the object of the senses. Many translations have treated the original text in a way which, while consistent with the grammar of the verse, presents a false picture of its teaching and is contrary to the essential principle of action and of renunciation. It is the permanency of bliss consciousness gained through the yoga of action, and again, it is the state of renunciation gained through the yoga of renunciation based on bliss consciousness that keep the self unaffected during the experience of joy. It is not the intellectual practice of trying to hold the mind back and keep it unaffected during the process of experience that brings one to bliss consciousness and to the state of renunciation where the self is experienced as separate from activity. It is because the self is joined in union with Brahman that a man enjoys eternal happiness. The reason why the joys of senses cannot make a deep impression on the enlightened man is that his self has become self, which is wholly blissful in nature. Being wide awake in cosmic intelligence, his natural stand is at the fountainhead of all the joys of all the senses. Being permanently established in absolute bliss, the temporary joys of relative existence fails to fascinate his self. Even when sensory objects come into contact with his senses, the joys of such contacts are not so powerful as to distract the self from its natural state of bliss consciousness. This is why his self remains
तो ज्यादा नहीं
unaffected
सुना तो मुझे नीचे जाने की जरूरत नहीं है.
while his senses are fully in contact with their objects. The expressions self is untouched by external contacts, knows that happiness which is in the self and his self joined in union with Brahman place Sankhya and Yoga on a common basis, thus upholding verses 4 and 5, which contains the essence of the teaching of this chapter. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. So here in this verse, the most important thing is he whose self is untouched by external contacts. Now, the self is forever established in its own essential nature. And the crux of this verse is the bliss consciousness has become permanent. And when this bliss consciousness comes in contact with objects, then it is not really affected by this raga dveshas, because the self, the smaller self, is joined with the bigger self and is union with the Brahman. Bigger self is the Brahman. So the small self is joined in union with Brahman. Now, the second point here is self is untouched by external contacts. In order to gain the experience of the inner self in the transcendental state of consciousness, the experience of outside objects has to be eliminated. So how is this eliminated? It's only eliminated because of this, through the constant experience of the self. Through the constant experience of the self, again and again having this transcendental experience, then the mind, the self becomes so familiar to the mind that the very nature of the mind is transformed. The very nature of the mind is transformed. Then the transcendental consciousness is maintained together with the waking state of consciousness. And this is where we say it is the cosmic consciousness. So the two exist together. The transcendental, that means the self and the non-self exist together. By virtue of this permanent maintenance of the transcendental consciousness, the self is always experienced as self. And simultaneously, by virtue of the waking state of consciousness, activity continues to be experienced. So here, the small self has become the big self, and then, it is become the witness, and the non-self is continuing with its activity. So the activity is being continued. And this is in this state, the self is not lost. The self, the experience of knowing yourself is not lost, or the small self is lost forever, according to Maharishi's commentary. So next is joined in union with Brahman. Joined in union with Brahman. This is the state of the cosmic consciousness in which he is awake in the world and awake within himself. And what Maharishi has said here is that many of the commentators have done great injustice to this teaching and thought, that it is just a mood making, that I am experiencing the self, and everything, I am detached, or I am not affected by this, or I feel unbounded, or I feel in bondage. All these things, these mood making things have affected many of the commentaries. And what he is saying is, now it is important to understand that it is actually on the level of the experience and gaining this permanency of the consciousness, the transcendental consciousness becoming permanent and becoming the bliss consciousness, the bliss consciousness of the cosmic consciousness. So, in the permanency of the bliss consciousness, the yoga of action is separate and the self is separate. And having experiencing this bliss consistently, and you don't have the attraction or the same raga for all the things that are going around, then naturally this renunciation is coming. And it is not the intellectual practice of trying to hold the mind back and keep it unaffected during the process of experience that brings one to bliss consciousness and to the state of renunciation, where the self is experienced as separate from activity. So, this is a very important thing, because a lot of the seekers think, that this mood making and continuously thinking on this level will bring the renunciation. But the renunciation, if it comes naturally, then there is not so much of a strain. Then, it is, you accept it, it is blissful, there is fulfillment, and it is natural. Naturally you become a sannyasi. Okay. Jai Gurudev.
Yes, Mataji, the scientific research on this
Yeah.
verse says that whose self is untouched by external contacts knows that happiness which is in the self.
Yeah.
And he enjoys the eternal happiness because through Maharishi transcendental meditation, there would be increased calmness, there will be greater flexibilities in understanding the reality, more balanced mood, increased happiness. There will be more inner growth and fulfillment, and we may not require outside stimulation. So there will be great optimism. Jai Gurudev.
Yes, because the flexibility comes because when you become, everything becomes natural. You're naturally, the thoughts become natural, the actions are natural, the detachment is the natural, and the renunciation is natural. Then naturally you are flexible, because you understand, there is no permanency here. So where is the need to be rigid? Where is the need to be fixed in one kind of a thought or an idea, or follow an action which does not produce results? So then naturally this flexibility will come. And when the flexibility comes, then the strain and the stress will also be less. You will be like that tree, which swings when the air comes, and or those flowers which are dancing, with the wind and all those things, the waves which are moving naturally and spontaneously. You also become like that. Okay. Jai Gurudev.
Mataji, would you like us to complete verse 22 as
Yeah.
Himaji has said?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, Hima, can you read the Sanskrit and I'll read the English?
Yes, sir, Anitaji. Thank you. Jai Gurudev. येति संस्पर्शजा भोगा दुःख एनय एव ते आद्यन्तवन्तः कौन्तेय न तेषु रमते बुधः येहि संस्पर्शजा भोगा दुःखयोनय एव ते आद्यन्तवन्तः kaunteya na teshu ramate buddha. All pleasures born of contact are only sources of sorrow. They have a beginning and an end, O son of Kunti. The enlightened man does not rejoice in them. Chekuti.
This verse contrasts with the previous one in that it explains the principle of the unattached state of the self, and at the same time complements it by clarifying the principle of happiness and suffering. Contact, as in the previous verse, this means contact of the self with the field of activity or experience. It depicts the state in which the self does not remain untouched, the state in which the self remains involved with the field of experience and joys of the senses. Such joys are the sources of sorrow by virtue of the self being involved with them. If, however, the self remains untouched, then the joys of the senses are not sources of sorrow, for in that state the self is established in eternal happiness. When the mind begins to take delight in the objects of the senses, this shows that its delight is not within. The mind is not anchored to the bliss of the self, it is absorbed in the outer direction away from bliss. If the mind no longer faces in the direction of bliss, and if it is not neutral, then it is obviously turned towards sorrow. Therefore, when the mind is absorbed in outer joys, then it is absorbed in the field of sorrow. Anything that leads the mind in an outward direction becomes a source of sorrow. This truth about the enjoyments of the world is valid when considered from the level of cosmic consciousness and from that of God consciousness, the ultimate reality of life. Seen from the ordinary level of the consciousness of man, to say that the pleasures born of contact are only sources of sorrow seems absurd. Yet, even on the level of consciousness, the same principle applies. There are only sources of sorrow, the reason being that they have a beginning and an end. The enlightened man does not rejoice in them, established in the state of eternal happiness, in Brahmisthiti, and experiencing the self as separate from activity. He has by nature risen above the phenomenal phase of life, above the fleeting joys of the relative field, and so he is not in the state where he can rejoice in temporary joys. Whether a retailer becomes a wholesale merchant, he no longer deals in the retail field, which requires more effort and produces less profit. The experience of the objects of the senses in the waking state differs from that in the state of cosmic consciousness. It may be likened to the experience of objects through glasses of different colors, whereby the same object is experienced differently. The enlightened man is simply not in a position to rejoice in them as he did before realization, because of the difference in the state of consciousness. Sources of sorrow, the intensity of happiness, and one can enjoy depends on the level of one's consciousness. At every level of consciousness, there is a corresponding intensity of happiness. This principle applies also to intelligence and power. The difference between the consciousness of an enlightened man and that of the unenlightened is as great as that between the absolute and the relative, between light and darkness. For this reason, the joys of the senses, which delight the ignorant, are looked upon as sources of sorrow by the wise. In comparison with the eternal bliss of Absolute, in which the enlightened are naturally established, the fleeting joys of the world are only sources of sorrow. When Sri Krishna Bhagavan uses these words, It is to express the truth and at the same time strike hard at the minds of those who are engrossed in such joys and whose vision is thus blinded. If the self delights in the experience of objects, since the objects are changing, the delight will soon be lost. This loss of pleasure will give rise to suffering. That is why Shri Krishna Bhagavan says they have a beginning and an end. Their enlightenment does not rejoice in them. He who lacks contact with inner being becomes engrossed in external pleasures. They have a beginning and an end. This expression presents a contrast with eternal happiness in the previous verse. When one joy comes to an end, the self is subjected to the state without joy, which in contrast with the experience of joy is suffering. But if the self has gained a state of perpetual happiness, then it is left with no possibility of suffering. Absence of bliss consciousness is the source of sorrow. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. So here, the important things are, first, it's important to understand the consciousness of the enlightened man and that of the unenlightened is as great as that between the absolute and the relative, between light and darkness. So because of this reason, because there is this contrast between the enlightened and the non-enlightened, unenlightened. So for this reason, the joys of the senses which delight the ignorant are looked upon as source of sorrow by the wise. In comparison with the eternal bliss of the absolute, in which the enlightened are naturally established, these fleeting joys of the world are only sources of sorrow. So again, when you go back to the verse, it says, all pleasures born of contact are only sources of sorrow. This is how the enlightened looks, that all pleasures born of contact are only sources of sorrow, whether even if they are fleeting, there is happiness, there is fleeting joy, and there is fleeting gains, they ultimately become source of sorrow. Because, why? Because they have a beginning and they have an end. You might say, that something good is happening here, but then that good may not last forever. So the enlightened man does not rejoice in them. So again, in the past verse, we have understood that he is there with his feet firmly on the ground and he is in the world. Although he is fully awake within himself, he is fully awake to the world. He is also doing things in the world, but he is also situated in the self and becomes, non-involved, or nishkama karma is being done there without any attachment and without having that feeling that contact with the things. So again and again, in this verse it says, when the mind is absorbed in the outer joys, then it is absorbed in the field of sorrow. And anything that leads the mind in an outward direction becomes a source of sorrow. So how can the mind not come out? It will not come out only when it becomes established in the self, that means the bigger self. And when it's established in the bigger self, then, or in the Atma, then it is in that Atmananda, it is enjoying itself. And because of that, it has no interest in coming out and being involved with everything in the normal way. So the work has to be done. Even the enlightened, they are doing all the work that is needed to be done. Maharishi Ji has done, Gurudev has done so much for the world. And, and all the enlightened beings so far, we have seen that they have done the greatest work. But they remain as the self, and they don't have they don't experience this contact with the senses because they know as the truth that there is a beginning and an end. It is forever changing, and they become only sources of sorrow. So the enlightened man does not rejoice in them.
And
So,
Mataji, the
yeah,
scientific research also says here
yeah.
that when you are established in that eternal blissfulness, then
Mhm.
there is increased happiness, contentment, fulfillment, and balance in your life, which leads to increased intrinsic spirituality. And there is a unified cosmic perspective on life, which leads to enhanced inner well being. So, the scientific research is so beautiful in this because it talks about the self development and how it takes the enlightened man in that state to further eternal blissfulness.
Yeah, because that's all in this whole verse is just, saying the consciousness of the enlightened man and that of the enlightened are two different things, just like, day and night, and the absolute and the relative. And there, one more point in this verse is that happiness, the inner happiness, is different at the different states of consciousness.
Consciousness.
In the cosmic consciousness, it is different. In the God consciousness, it is different. In the unity consciousness and Brahman, it is different. And so that way you will know it only, in an experiential way. But empirically, you would understand that the level of the happiness is different. But what is our job is to always get back to the self and see that we maintain this bliss consciousness, because by only maintaining bliss consciousness, because bliss is nothing other than Atma. So that means you are being the self. So if you are able to maintain this bliss consciousness, then there is more and more of this expansion of this absolute happening very quickly into the relative. And there is more and more opportunity for you to become enlightened in this one life. All right. Jai Gurudev.
Thank you so much, Jai Gurudev Mataji, for the beautiful explanation of the verses. We
Yeah.
are so happy to be with you. Thank you very much, Jai Gurudev.
Thank you. Any questions? Otherwise, I will take leave, if you don't mind.
Mataji, we have overshot the time also. I
Yeah.
think we should take leave.
Because,
Um,
Hemaji told me just, a few hours before, she said, can you come on? Because
mhm.
I didn't check the message, when she put the message for me.
No, it's all right. It's always so nice to have you in our session. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Stay blissful, stay warm. Jai
Yeah,
Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. Okay, Sunita, can we close now? I do not know what is further for you to display and all. Mataji is leaving. We say Jai Gurudev to her.
Yes.
And Sunita, what is further?
Jai Gurudev, Anitaji. We'll wind up with Ghanshyam ji.
Okay.
Ghanshyam ji,
शांति
आप हैं?
जी दीदी जय गुरुदेव।
घनश्याम जी, आज के लिए आप शांति पाठ कीजिए लास्ट में। अभी और हम कार्यक्रम को समाप्त कर देंगे।
जी जी शुरू
क्योंकि
करें।
आज बहुत टाइम हो गया है कि 15 मिनट से ज्यादा है हम लोग।
या
आज पारायण नहीं हो पाएगा पूरे अध्याय का। तो अगर हो सके तो पहला श्लोक और आखिरी श्लोक पढ़ के शांति पाठ कीजिएगा।
जी दीदी।
धन्यवाद।
ओम शांताकारं भुजगशयनं पद्मनाभं सुरेशं विश्वाधारं गगनसदृशं मेघवर्णं शुभांगं लक्ष्मीकान्तं कमलनयनं योगविद्यानगम्यं वन्दे विष्णुं भवभयहरं सर्वलोकैकनाथम्। ॐ श्री परमात्मने नमः। पंचमोऽध्यायः कर्मसन्न्यासयोगः। अर्जुन उवाच सन्न्यासं कर्मणां कृष्ण पुनर्योगं च संससि यच्छेयाये तयोरेकं तन्मे ब्रूहि सुनिश्चितम् ॐ भोक्तारं यज्ञतपसां सर्वलोकमहेश्वरं सुहृदं सर्वभूतानां ज्ञात्वा मां शान्तिमृच्छति ॐ तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे कर्मसन्न्यासयोगो नाम पञ्चमोऽध्यायः। ॐ श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु। हरिः ॐ आद्योः शान्तिरन्तर्जगं शान्तिः पृथिवी शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोगदयः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वे देवाः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिः सर्वगुं शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सामा शान्तिरेधि जतो यतः समीहसे ततो नो अभयं कुरु सन्नः कुरु प्रजाभ्यो भयन्नः पशुभ्यः ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। जय गुरुदेव।
Jai Gurudev. Today we will wind up the session here. Jai Gurudev to one and all who have been attending this.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev Anita ji.
जय गुरुदेव दीदी। जय गुरुदेव
घनश्याम जी धन्यवाद।
जी दीदी। जय गुरुदेव।
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev ma'am.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. We will wind up today.
Jai Gurudev Anita ji.